Every story leaves something behind. A whisper, a shadow, a question that was never answered. Here, we dig through the forgotten files, the unsolved mysteries, the chilling true crimes, and the horrors people wish had stayed buried. From haunted legends to real-life nightmares, every tale is pulled straight from the horror archives. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step carefully, because once a story enters the horror archives, it never truly leaves. This video contains 4 true stories from people who had deeply unsettling experiences inside museums, places that are supposed to preserve the past. But sometimes, the past doesn't stay behind the glass. The first story was sent in by a security guard who worked weekends at a natural history museum in New York. He calls it the docent who wasn't on the schedule. There was a woman giving tours who nobody had ever hired. And when he checked the security footage, she wasn't on camera either. The woman giving the tour wasn't listed on any staff roster. I know because I checked 3 times after what happened. I work as a weekend security guard at a natural history museum in upstate New York. It's a smaller institution, the kind with creaky hardwood floors and taxidermy displays that haven't been updated since the 80s. The lighting is always a little too dim, even during operating hours. There's a smell to the place, like dust and formaldehyde, and something faintly sweet underneath it all, like old flowers. It was a Sunday in November. The museum was quiet, maybe 40 visitors total. I was doing my usual rounds through the East Wing when I heard a voice echoing from the Hall of Regional Wildlife. It was a woman speaking in this calm, measured tone, a tour guide voice. But I knew we didn't have any guided tours scheduled that day. We only run those on Saturdays. I walked toward the sound and found a small group, maybe 6 or 7 people, standing in a half circle around a woman in a navy blazer. She had a museum lanyard around her neck. She was maybe 50, short gray hair, glasses on a chain. She looked completely normal. She was talking about the black bear display, giving facts about hibernation patterns. The visitors were nodding along. I almost walked away. Almost, but something made me look at her lanyard. The badge was turned backward, so I couldn't see the name or photo. That's a minor thing, right? People flip their badges all the time, but we have a small staff. I know everyone, and I had never seen this woman before. I radioed the front desk and asked if we had a guest docent or volunteer that day. They said no, nobody extra was on the schedule. I went back to the hall. The group had moved on to the bird room. The woman was pointing at a display of passenger pigeons and talking about extinction, but the things she was saying were wrong. She was saying the last passenger pigeon died in this museum, that its body was kept in the basement, that they could hear it at night if the building was quiet enough. A soft cooing sound from beneath the floor. The visitors were just staring at her. Nobody was nodding anymore. One man looked at me with this expression, like he wanted permission to leave. I approached the woman and asked if I could see her badge. She smiled at me. It was a completely normal smile, but it didn't reach her eyes at all. She said of course and reached for the lanyard, then turned and walked briskly toward the back hallway that leads to the staff offices. I followed her. The hallway was maybe 60 feet long and dead straight. She turned the corner at the end. When I got to that corner, no more than 5 seconds later, the hallway was empty. Every door was locked. I checked them all. I pulled the security footage later. The cameras showed me walking down the hallway alone. There was no woman ahead of me. But here's the thing that still bothers me. On the footage from the bird room, you can see the group of visitors standing in a half circle. You can see them looking at something. You can see me approach. But where the woman should be standing, there's just empty space. The visitors are arranged around nothing. I asked the front desk to help me track down any of those visitors. None of them had signed the guest book. None had bought tickets. Our turnstile count for the day was 43. But when we checked the camera footage of the entrance, only 36 people actually walked in. I don't work Sundays anymore. That detail about the turnstile count not matching the camera footage is the kind of thing that just sits with you. Sometimes the numbers don't add up, and you really don't want to know why. This next story comes from a night custodian at a history museum in Ohio. He calls it the exhibit that moved overnight. The mannequins in a pioneer display were rearranging themselves between shifts, and what he found when he set up a camera to record them is something I wouldn't want to see. The mannequins in the Pioneer exhibit were not in the same positions they'd been in when I locked up the night before. And I don't mean slightly shifted, I mean completely rearranged. I was a night custodian at a history museum in central Ohio for about 2 years. The building used to be a courthouse in the 1800s, and they converted it in the 70s. It still had the original jail cells in the basement, which they used as a display about local law enforcement history. The whole place felt heavy, if that makes sense, like the air had weight to it, especially after midnight. The Pioneer Life exhibit was on the 2nd floor. It had 6 mannequins arranged in a cabin scene, a woman at a spinning wheel, a man chopping wood, children sitting at a table. Standard stuff. I passed through it every night during my cleaning rounds. One Tuesday morning, I came in to start my shift at 11 p.m. and did my usual walkthrough to check for anything unusual before the cleaning started. When I got to the Pioneer exhibit, I stopped in the doorway. The man who was supposed to be chopping wood was now standing at the window, facing out. The woman at the spinning wheel had been moved to the far corner and was facing the wall. The children were gone from the table entirely. I found them on the other side of the room, arranged in a line, all facing the doorway where I was standing. I called my supervisor immediately. He came in about an hour later, looked at it, and said someone on the day staff must have been rearranging for an update. He put them back. I watched him do it. I helped carry the woodcutter back to his spot. The mannequin was heavier than it should have been. It felt dense, like lifting a real person. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, all 6 mannequins were gathered in the center of the room, arranged in a tight circle, facing inward, like they were having a meeting, like they were planning something. Their painted eyes were all pointed at the floor. I started checking the security cameras. The 2nd floor camera that covered the hallway outside the exhibit had a gap in its coverage. Between 2:15 and 2:40 a.m., the footage just showed static, not a blackout, just heavy static, like an old television between channels. When the image came back, the hallway was empty and still, but the shadows from inside the exhibit room looked different, longer. I set up my phone to record inside the room one night, propped it on a shelf behind glass, angled at the mannequins. I went to clean the 1st floor and came back 2 hours later. The phone was still recording, but when I played it back, at the 1 hour and 22-minute mark, the screen goes dark. Not static this time, just black. And for about 40 seconds, there's audio. It sounds like breathing, not mechanical, not the HVAC. Breathing, slow and deliberate. And then, very faintly, the sound of something dragging across the floor. When the image comes back, the mannequins have moved again. The woman is standing right in front of my phone. Her face fills the frame. Her painted expression is the same as it always was, a slight pleasant smile. But I swear the angle of her head was different, tilted, like she was looking into the camera. I quit the following week. Before I left, I looked up the history of the mannequins. They'd been donated in 1983 by a family estate. The family had owned a funeral home. The mannequins had originally been used for mortuary display training. I try not to think about what was inside them. They're mortuary display training mannequins. That's not something I knew existed before this story. And honestly, I wish I still didn't. Story number 3 is from a visitor at an art museum in Philadelphia. He calls it the voice in the audio guide. He picked up an audio guide that hadn't been in circulation for years, and it started telling him things about himself that no recording should know. The audio guide was telling me things that weren't in the script, things about me specifically. I was visiting an art museum in Philadelphia on a weekday afternoon in February, the kind of cold, gray day where museums are almost empty. I'd been maybe a dozen times before. I knew the layout well, but I'd never used the audio guide. This time I grabbed one from the front desk on impulse. It was an older model, a chunky black device with a number pad and a set of headphones. I started in the impressionist wing on the 3rd floor. You punch in the number next to a painting, and it gives you a short narration about the artist and the work. The first few were normal, standard stuff about Monet and Degas. The narrator had a calm male voice, almost monotone, like a public radio host. When I got to painting number 314, a Renoir landscape, I punched in the number and the voice started normally. It talked about the brushwork and the use of light. Then, without any change in tone, it said, "You're wearing a green jacket today. You always wear that jacket when you're alone." I pulled the headphones off and looked around. There was nobody near me. One other visitor was at the far end of the gallery, not looking my way. I stared at the device. I was wearing my green jacket. I put the headphones back on. The narration had moved on to the next painting, as if I'd pressed a button. I hadn't. The voice was describing a Cézanne still life, apples and a picture. It gave accurate art historical information for about 30 seconds, then said, "You came here because your apartment felt wrong this morning. Something about the light in your bedroom. You couldn't name it, but you needed to leave." That was true. I'd woken up feeling deeply uneasy for no reason. The light through my blinds had a quality to it that felt off, like it was coming from the wrong angle. I decided to go to the museum to shake the feeling. I should have returned the device right then, but I didn't. I kept listening. I moved to the next gallery. The voice described a Thomas Eakins painting in perfect detail, then added, "There's someone standing behind you who's been following you since the second floor. Don't turn around yet." My whole body went cold. I could feel the presence of someone behind me, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck. I turned around slowly. The gallery was empty, completely empty, but the bench in the center of the room had an impression on it, like someone had just been sitting there. The leather was still slightly compressed. The voice continued without me pressing anything. It said, "Room 412 has a painting that was removed from display in 2019. If you go to the wall where it used to hang, you'll find the hook is still there. Don't look at the wall too long. The stain behind where the frame was is not water damage." I walked to room 412. I don't know why. It felt compulsory. The room was a small gallery of American portraiture, and on the far wall, between two colonial-era paintings, there was an empty space, a single hook, and below it a brownish stain on the white wall, roughly the shape of a handprint, with fingers that were too long. The audio guide spoke one more time. I hadn't touched it. The voice said, "You need to leave now, not because of what's in the museum, because of what followed you here from your apartment. It's standing in the doorway of this room. If you look at it directly, it will know you can see it. Walk past it. Don't make eye contact. Go home. Lock your door. It will lose interest eventually." I put the device down on the bench. I walked to the doorway of the room. There was nothing visible there, but the air in that doorway was freezing cold. And as I passed through it, I felt something brush against my shoulder, like fingers, like someone reaching for me and barely missing. I returned the audio guide to the front desk. The woman looked at it and said they hadn't used that model in over 6 years. She asked where I'd gotten it. I pointed at the basket by the entrance. It was empty. She said they'd switched to a phone app system in 2018. I went home and locked my door. That night, I heard something pacing in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps, back and forth. For hours, when I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty, but the footsteps didn't stop until sunrise. The idea that something followed him to the museum and then followed him back home, that's the part that gets me, because it means the museum wasn't the source. It was just where he finally noticed. This last story is the one that disturbed me the most. It was sent in by a graduate student who had after-hours access to a major museum for her research. She calls it the child in the glass case. I'll let you decide what to make of it, but I'll warn you now. This one stays with you. There was a child inside one of the display cases in the Egyptian wing. Not a mummy, not a replica, a living child standing perfectly still, staring at me through the glass. I need to explain this carefully because I know how it sounds. I'm a graduate student in art conservation. Last spring, I was granted after-hours access to a major museum in the Northeast to study textile preservation techniques on some of their stored collection pieces. I had a key card, a list of approved rooms, and permission to be in the building from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 3 nights a week. The security staff knew me by name. The Egyptian wing wasn't on my approved list, but it was on the way to the storage corridor I used, and sometimes I'd cut through it. The wing is arranged in a long rectangle, with freestanding glass cases down the center and wall-mounted displays on either side. At night, the overhead lights are off, but the cases stay illuminated from within. So you're walking through this dark hall, and these objects are glowing softly on either side of you. Canopic jars, amulets, fragments of painted sarcophagi. The first time I saw the child, I thought it was my reflection. I was passing a large case that held a collection of Shabti figures, those small carved servants meant to work in the afterlife. The case was about 4 feet tall, and inside, standing among the rows of Shabti, was what appeared to be a small girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a plain white dress. She was completely motionless. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her eyes were open and fixed directly on me. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped my bag. I looked again. The case held only the Shabti figures, dozens of small carved statues, nothing else. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the reflection, the late hour. I moved on. The second night, I saw her again. Different case. This one held a collection of ancient jewelry, gold pectorals and beaded collars. She was standing behind the jewelry, deeper inside the case than should have been physically possible given its dimensions. Same white dress, same gray skin, same fixed stare. This time, her head was tilted slightly to one side. I walked up to the glass and looked closely. She didn't move, she didn't blink, but she was three-dimensional. She cast a shadow inside the case against the back panel. Reflections don't cast shadows. I pressed my hand against the glass. The surface was warm, not room temperature, warm like skin. And when I touched it, the girl's mouth opened, just slightly, not like she was going to speak, like she was going to breathe in. I pulled my hand back and walked away fast. I told myself I'd take the long way to the storage corridor from then on. And I did, for about 2 weeks. But then I started hearing things, a tapping sound, faint and irregular, coming from the direction of the Egyptian wing. It happened every night I was there. It sounded like small knuckles on glass. I'd hear it through the walls of the storage corridor, muffled but persistent. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the Egyptian wing. The tapping stopped the moment I entered the hall. Every display case was as it should be, artifacts in place, no child, except one case near the far end, a case that held a painted wooden mask, the kind placed over a mummy's face. The mask was supposed to be mounted upright on a stand. It was lying face down, and in the condensation on the inside of the glass, there were handprints, small handprints, a child's handprints. On the inside, I reported it to the night security supervisor. He came to look. The handprints were still there. He got very quiet. Then he told me something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said that in 2011, the museum had received a collection of artifacts from a private estate. Among them was a child's sarcophagus, sealed, containing a mummy that was estimated to be about 5 years old at the time of death. The museum had planned to display it, but reversed the decision after 3 separate conservators who worked on the piece reported feeling watched in the lab. One of them found small, bare footprints in the dust of the storage room, leading from the sarcophagus to the door. The sarcophagus was moved to a secure off-site facility, but the artifacts that were in the same shipment, the Shabti figures, the jewelry, the mask, those all stayed. They were put on display in the Egyptian wing. He said other night staff had seen the girl. Nobody talked about it openly. They just avoided the wing after dark. I asked him where the off-site facility was. He said it was a climate-controlled warehouse, about 40 minutes outside the city. Then he paused and told me they'd moved the sarcophagus back to the museum 6 months ago. Budget cuts closed the warehouse. It was now in the basement, 2 floors directly below where we were standing. That night as I was leaving at 6 a.m., I passed through the main lobby. The sun was just starting to come through the front windows and in the glass of the lobby doors. Just for a second, I saw a small figure standing at the top of the basement stairs behind me. When I turned, there was nothing there, but the basement door was open. I'm certain it had been closed when I walked past it earlier. I finished my research at a different institution. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night in my own apartment, I hear a faint tapping. It's soft and irregular, and it's always coming from inside the walls. Museums are supposed to be places where we preserve the past, but some things that end up in those collections were never meant to be kept, and they know it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.
And that's where tonight's file closes, but the archives are far from empty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more horrors, mysteries, and true crimes hidden in the horror archives. Until next time, keep the lights low, keep listening, because you never know what story we'll uncover next.